everyone listening, this I don't remember what episode of Podlomatic this is. I just want to do a rolling start. Uh, yeah, guests, please introduce yourselves. Go for it.
Hey everyone, this is Timothy Lim. I'm the creator and artist for Common America, Black Ops, and a few other titles you might know, such as Stump the First 100 Days and the My Hero Macadamia series.
Hi, this is Mark Pellegrini. I'm the co-creator and scripter of some comics such as Common America, Black Hops, and also an author. I write some horror novels, my latest one being They'll Get You, which is available on Amazon.
Okay, and we'll talk about the projects and anything you want to plug a little later on, I guess. But I do want to resume on what we were discussing before we started recording because I just thought it was super fascinating. But for anyone who doesn't know, by way of introduction, you guys are comics creators. We have a mutual, I guess, interest in current event politics. How do you, I guess, to go back to what we were discussing before, how do you reconcile your creative output and, I guess, having our hands on the pulse of today, to put it a certain way?
Well, I think it goes back to where Mark and I started creatively. So I don't know if you've experienced this, George, but I certainly do. But when I was a kid, I was always embarrassed by creating something out of whole cloth, like an original character. Part of it was just the embarrassment of someone being like, "Oh, well, what are you drawing right now?" And I didn't want to tell them, "Oh, this is my original character who looks like Batman but isn't Batman."
Yeah.
So what happened was I had a natural proclivity towards like satire. I always thought that Mel Brooks movies were funny because, like, for example, Spaceballs is like, oh, it's a mashup between Star Wars and some other goofy comedies you might recognize. And I think that Mark and I really gelled together when we initially met. We'd always share jokes and we'd reference things like The Simpsons. So I think satire kind of runs in our blood because we're so used to it. And as far as like where we see politics and pop culture, we were discussing it a little bit before we went live. But in terms of politics, there are things that you can look at in satire because satire is nothing more than basically what is known except taken to the next level in a very hyperbolic way. And if you have your finger on the pulse of politics, a lot of times you can predict ahead of time what is going to show up in pop culture. And there are sites like the Babylon Bee, for example, and in your work, George, where this is like not the latest craze, but you're definitely riding this wave of popularity that's just growing and growing and growing because you're speaking truth in a very funny way, but you can look through the hyperbole and see the truth that's beneath it, or you can actually see where things are going. And as far as our work is concerned, even though we're straying a little bit away from the political stuff, we're still actively asking ourselves these questions, especially in the changing political climate. And by changing, I mean like literally day by day. You watch what's happening with the election right now, and it's almost like we're in a Twilight Zone moment where it's like the final inning of a game and everyone is tied, and it's just you're having like these point gains that are done one by one, and you have no idea who's going to come out at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to know this stuff because as far as the stuff that we put out is concerned, it really does have a determining factor in terms of the tone and in terms of the content that we put out.
And how did you guys get together in the first place to start collaborating? I don't
We
think we've talked about this before on the channel.
no, I don't think that we have. We actually work for the same company as far as movie reviews are concerned. This was back in the day when I think there were only two major independent news outlets as far as movie criticisms were concerned. The first big one being like Ain't It Cool News with Harry Knowles. That just shows our age. And I don't even remember the second one. I remember the guy's name was John who did it. I think it was like the movie guy or something like that. But there was a website called Filmsy that was run by a friend of mine, and so Mark and I met through that, just doing movie reviews. And I think it was the fact that our our opinions were very similar in terms of the way that we looked at pop culture and at films, that we found out that we had a lot in common as far as our mutual taste is concerned.
And did you know you lived near each other? How did?
We didn't live near each other at the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Tim was living in Arkansas at the time, and I was living up in Virginia. And I didn't move down to Arkansas until 2012, which was like 5 or 6 or 7 years after we met. So that was a long time. We only pretty much knew each other as online collaborators for most of that time.
Okay, so you guys knew each other, and did you move down there, Mark, because of the partnership, or just it felt like
I moved. Well, so I lived in Fairfax County, which has one of the highest costs of living in the country, and I was renting a place with 2 other people, and I had been doing that for like 5 years, and I just got sick of it. I was like, I'm earning what would be a living, an independent living, in pretty much any other county in any other state in the country that isn't like Los Angeles or New York.
Yeah.
But instead, I've got to rent this one level place with 2 other people, just to get by. And then Tim was like, I'm in Little Rock. Here's the cost of living. And it was like a fraction of what it was in Fairfax. And like, oh man, I could live like a king down there. I'm just going to go ahead and move down there. And
That's
very
like, okay,
attractive. Yeah, I can show you around.
Someday I'm going to ask you guys some advice on that one too, I'm sure. Up in New Jersey.
Oh yeah, red states right now. It's the thing.
It's
and
the place to be.
It is, and the only frustrating thing, because right now I'm in Texas, we have a lot of transfers from California, and they're moving into Austin. Spoiler alert: they vote the way they did from the places they came from, and I mean that in and of itself is a topic for a whole nother day. But it's infuriating because we were talking a little bit about voter misinformation and low information voting, and these people are like the pinnacle of it. I talked to these, especially artists, young kids who moved from California to Austin, and it's like, oh, why did you move? Oh, the cost of living was so high and it was gross because there was like poop on the street. It's, okay, so what do you not like about living in Texas? Oh, I don't like the politics. Like there's so many, everyone's like a Republican. Like I'm gonna be so happy to vote in November for my guy.
Interesting.
It's like, do you not know the politics that you voted for were what created the conditions that made you move in the first place? That type of thing.
Yeah, I don't know how that's going to play out in the next, say, 10, 20 years. I mean, when I was young, obviously, since I was young, I knew Texas was what it was, very right-leaning and all that stuff. And the Lone Star State being like, we will do our thing no matter what the rest of the country is doing. And then I sort of see the migration happening, and I'm thinking, oh, shoot. It's slowly... I don't know. I'm slowly seeing changes, I guess, under the guise of compassion and, hey, let's be nice to everybody. But then you can sort of gauge the health of the country, I would say, by looking at what Texas is doing. I'm speaking as someone from the Northeast now. Watching where Texas is sort of the canary in the coal mine as far as where the rest of the country is going to go. Already we know that the coastal cities, left and right, have been turned hard blue. There's no changing that. But if the South Coast is taken, it turns blue. It's like, oh, it's sort of like a weird pincer move culturally. That I see it happening from a blue state, and I'm like, oh shoot, please don't turn blue.
Yeah, and I think that's why it becomes even more important for messaging to get across. I mean, there's actually a lot to be very happy for as far as conservatism is concerned. One is that the upcoming generation is apparently very conservative. They like Donald Trump. They reject the boomerism and the millennial culture completely because it's focused on almost a mindless consumerism. Whereas even in the wake of an information age, I think what it is that young people like to stay connected. They like the idea of instantaneous information. And with the information traveling so fast, I think that they can actually consume it, digest it, and actually repeat it in probably a more cogent fashion than any three of us could, much less our parents. The other thing too is that I don't think anyone is debating anymore, but supposedly Florida is probably not going to be a swing state, at least for the next 2 elections. They were assuming it was somewhere of a purple in terms of anywhere it could go, but because Donald Trump did such a good job flipping the votes in Miami-Dade County, they're like, no, this election was called with only half the vote in.
And that's the thing too, is that there's all these places that are blue and they're considered lost causes for conservative votes and conservative candidates. but we're kind of learning, and this is a whole rabbit hole, in current events, but we're kind of learning that a lot of votes that are counted aren't necessarily votes that were real. A lot of voters who were counted aren't necessarily voters who were alive.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of these places where there was less rigging going on because the assumption was that the vote was going to go a certain way, it didn't. It was just assumed that Trump would lose the Hispanic vote because he's a white male conservative, and they only vote Democrat. Minorities only vote Democrat. But all of a sudden he got a huge portion of the Hispanic votes in counties that were hard blue and considered could go his way. And those honest elections prove that the current wisdom may not be as true as we've been told it was. We just need an honest and fair election counting to know the truth.
That's true. And I also know that suspect/know that, say, for instance, I tease Latino people by calling them Latinx. And
God.
They hate that. They hate it so much. And I'm like, oh, good. I'm so glad you hate that. I'm going to take advantage. I'm going to poke fun. We're going to have a good time. But they don't like, I guess the hard left is sort of trying to turn their language, gender neutralize their language. And obviously that's off limits. That's one thing. And also I hear the black vote swung really hard towards Trump as well. And I think those groups, among others, have realized, especially these past few years, that the left doesn't care about them. They're just being used as chunks of voter chunks, I guess is the best way to put it.
Well, the left loved Asians when Asians were minorities, but now they're white. Asians white. Now they don't like you anymore, Tim. I'm sorry.
Yeah, now they can finally have an excuse to legitimately call me a white supremacist. And then when I say I'm not, they'll say, oh, but look at this study that shows that you are. It's like, again, we live in this weird twilight zone where independent thought and the cogency and the agency of the individual just doesn't matter. It's like, look at this study, look at this verified media account. It's like, yeah, but look with your own two eyes. Do I look white to you? Do I wear a Klan hood? Do I espouse anything that calls for the extinction of a race or anything of that nature? No. So yeah, it is very interesting. I do think that what you said is correct about the black and the Latino vote. I think that was very crucial. And the fact that Donald, whether the Republicans know it or not, whether they like it or not, the old GOP is gone. It's dead. They have to embrace what Donald Trump has done, which is expand the tent and include a multitude of people, not under the banner of what I guess we would consider the neocon movement, which happened in the wake of Reagan. I mean, heck, there's so many atheists, agnostics, gays, blacks. Anyone's welcome, because under a new form of conservatism, the only color that matters is green. What policy has Donald Trump implemented that actually negatively impacted your life if you were a hardworking American? Nothing. And his statement to the black community in the 2016 election was very important. He said, what do you have to lose? You've been living since the civil rights movement under the oppressive thumb of Democrats who said that they knew better than you and that they were out for your best interests. And yet nothing has transpired. And under Donald Trump, you had the lowest black unemployment in history. In fact, I think it was the lowest unemployment rate for every minority group across the board. And I think that some black celebrities, I think they actually helped flip that vote for him, probably the most prominent being Kanye West. And I think that by appealing to culture, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but the reality is that, as Breitbart said, politics is downstream from culture. So by appealing to a pop culture and getting people to at least wake up and give the thought that maybe they've been voting wrong this whole time, I really do think that he shifted things in a way that's going to hopefully benefit a lot of conservatives in the future, barring any election shenanigans that might transpire in the next 2 to 4 years.
Mm-hmm. Part of what I think we talked about this last time, Tim, on this note of cultural groups voting a certain way or being told to vote a certain way, is a sort of narrative of dependence versus self-reliance. And I think we talked about this last time also, is that I grew up around, half my friends were Asian immigrant, first generation. So I'm also first generation. My parents were immigrants as well. But there's this sort of immigrant mentality, I think, that is very much a sort of like, don't expect anything from anyone. You have to fight tooth and nail to earn every inch of everything. Like all your income, if you're self-employed like we are, you have to be willing to work 60 hours a week, nights, weekends, holidays. You have to crawl to get everything that you earn, versus this narrative of, hey, just by being quote unquote oppressed, and people look for ways to be oppressed, you will gain certain advantages. So we were talking about this the other day. I saw you tweet about this. Is the it's not a joke anymore of how in Asians were like being kicked out or pushed out of line to get into colleges because there's too many of them. Let's say they're too smart, they work too hard, and that's a form of privilege, which I think is the stupidest. It's going to backfire. I hope it backfires. People realize how stupid it is, but like, there is no such thing as working too hard unless you hurt yourself.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And the problem with equality and equity, actually, so everyone wants to strive for equality, but what the progressive left and the far left wants is they want equity. So they want the results to be equal no matter what. And the problem with that is that I think what I tweeted out a few days ago, it was actually in San Francisco in a very specific school district where there was a confrontation between Black parents and Asian parents in STEM, because Asian students outnumber everyone in STEM. And the Black parents were saying, well, this isn't fair because you stupid Asians are keeping the rest of us down. And the response was a legitimate one. It was, no, it's because we work harder. I mean, it's cultural. There's a reason why we have the term tiger mom. I had a tiger mom. I still have a tiger mom.
Yeah.
I was told from the time I started school, you will make all A's. If you don't make all A's, you're going to work in a McDonald's the rest of your life. Now, there's nothing wrong with working in McDonald's, but when you're a kid and you're always thinking about where you start, where you end up with, what you want to do, if you want to be a doctor, if you want to be a lawyer, engineer, whatever it might be, McDonald's is obviously not where you want to be. And so there's that legitimate fear of vocation. And it was this constant thing of, you got to make all A's, but got to make all A's. Yeah. And I would come home with a B or a B plus, and my gosh, I was excoriated for it. And that was just how we grew up. And that mindset is good. I mean, it's the work ethic that drives capitalism. The entire point of the capitalist model is, barring nothing else, if you work hard and put in your hours, you will be paid. That is something that's unheard of in countries where, in a sense, you have to basically work with no guarantee whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And I think that what's going to happen, especially because I think Asians right now make up the demographic most likely to vote conservative, even though they still pretty much across the board vote to the left. You're going to start to see a conflict in even the racial class, because obviously you have, I think Black people are more prominent. You have groups like Black Lives Matter, whereas Asians don't really have any single unified group that stands out. But there's going to be this competition between even those groups where they eat themselves. And I think that the Democrats are just going to have to reap what they sow when it comes to that point. Whereas I think over on the right, it's like, we don't care who you are. As long as if you're on our side, the idea is you're going to work, you're going to make money, and you're going to be happy. That's it. We're not going to try and pander to you based on privileges that you get over a different group.
Mm-hmm. Mark, do you have a similar cultural?
Well, I mean, so what Tim was talking about, it's not exclusively American. Obviously, like Japan and a lot of other countries have this work ethic, but it's the idea that an improved work ethic, it spawns from opportunity. I think it was Mark Twain who said that Americans, and by Americans he meant capitalists, behave like temporarily disgraced millionaires. Like, that's how we conduct ourselves. Like, we feel like someday we're going to be rich, someday we're going to be millionaires. Not true in most cases, but we feel that way because we have the opportunity to become rich, to become wealthy, to live that American dream if we work hard enough and we make the changes ourselves. And a lot of countries, and I feel it's better for us to feel like a temporarily disgraced millionaire than to go to a lot of these other countries where that opportunity doesn't exist. And so there's no feeling but despair. You go to work every day, you give all of your money or the majority of your money to the government. The government decides how much you can have back. and that's it. Anything you do individually will not improve your quality of life. There's no promotions, there's no raises, there's no upward momentum. You can work, a damn hard day and work your fingers to the bone. You can invent and you can create, but it's all going to go to the government with no recompense for yourself. The guy in Soviet Russia, I can't recall his name, he invented the AK-47, and the government said, the government thanks you for your generosity. Took his patent, took his invention. He never saw a dime for it. The guy who created Tetris, Tetris, he tried to circumvent that because he knew that the second he unveiled his creation, he would lose it to the government and never see a dime for it. So he tried going through various companies in Hungary, which were still part of the Soviet bloc, but were kind of on the other side of the Iron Curtain, because he knew that he had no opportunity in his socialist nation to be rewarded for his creativity and his hard work. So yeah, maybe Americans do, act like temporarily disgraced millionaires, but that's because we know we live in a country where you can be a millionaire, where you can work hard enough and you can get there. Maybe not always, but you can always improve your quality of life by working hard and dedicating yourself to it. Whereas if you just want to, collect welfare and sit in your ass smoking pot, you can do that too, but the quality of your life's never going to improve.
And I guess part of people object when the system is perceived or is unfair, and I would agree with that. The only time action should be taken in a political sense or socio-political sense is if my hard work does not correspond to a reward because somebody's getting in my way or stopping me from reaping the rewards because of some unfair system that's in place. I totally agree. Like we talked about the college thing. If people are being physically barred from entering despite working as hard as everybody else, having the same grades as everybody else. Like in Japan, they have a ranking system. I heard in high school, for instance, there's no A+, students, and you just get a GPA. There is an actual ranking system where there is a number one student, number two, all the way down to the end. And the only way to reach number one is to beat the other person by doing like one more AP class or something.
That's why tournament arcs are so popular in anime.
Yeah. And I dare say the American system is way better, where if we have the same GPA, that just means we have two champions who can move on and do great things in their own fields, whatever they choose to do. They don't have to compete necessarily. But I don't like the idea that people will, for instance, nerf someone who worked super hard. I didn't work as hard as you, but because of some arbitrary reason I'm going to make up, I get to take your place and do a worse job than you would have.
There's a lot. It used to be that nobody wanted to be a victim because there was nothing to gain from victimhood. If by nature of being a victim, it means you lost something or something wrong was done to you. But now there is so much benefit in claiming to be a victim. Like, hey, I'm being oppressed. I need various opportunities given to me instead of earning them because I'm oppressed. Or if you go online and you say, like, I'm a victim, this person misgendered me, or this person called me a mean name, or this or that, I have no evidence, but you've got to believe me because of a hashtag, then they just get millions or thousands of replies
sympathy,
saying, oh my gosh, like, oh, that's so terrible, we will fight to the death for you. And they get so much dopamine, they get so much positive reinforcement from being a victim. And this is kind of the first time in our society where that's been a thing, where instead of like telling someone to just stop crying about it and get back to work, or just like stop whining and do something about it. Now it's like, no, keep whining and we'll keep giving you money.
You can't get respect. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I'm done.
I agree. I'm totally agreeing. It's that you can't get respect through sympathy. You have to earn it / demand it. Like, I can't go up to a group of people and say, hey, and I know this from firsthand experience. You can't say, hey, something really bad happened to me. Can you feel sorry for me? And then I'll be successful. And I've seen other comics creators do this, and it doesn't work. Hey, someone was mean to me. Can you give me 1 million likes and retweets and follows? No one feels sorry for you. I've seen this firsthand, and I'm not saying it was manufactured. but some people can manufacture it. The only
Oh, and they
time,
do.
well, I have seen it manufactured, and I think people just have a sixth sense for this, like, hey, this is just a sneaky backdoor. They're trying to get in the back door kind of thing. But if you can prove that you're, like, let's say in the comics, again, this is supposed to be a comics channel. I know we're talking about politics, but if you can prove that you're a solid creator that is not to be messed with, you will get the respect that you deserve eventually. That's my assumption, and I can't prove this stuff. You know, I can't be like, when I was younger, I used to say, oh, I used to be very religious Christian, whatever. Oh, I'm not getting into comics because I'm a Christian religious person, whatever. It could have been that my comics just sucked and my politics were bad. They disagreed with my politics, I should say more accurately. But it doesn't matter.
Going back to piggybacking off of that that statement. So about a year ago, what Mark and I did, it was kind of like a self-business policy or model that we were going to have. It was this idea of we're disconnected from a lot of these movements, and especially like the insular community of independent comics. We're basically like pariahs, but the only thing that we can rely on is the quality of the work. So it was this idea of let's just put our heads down, let's work, and if our work is good, it will speak for itself. And I think the payoff that happened recently, I'm not going to mention any names, was there was a specific YouTuber who was basically trying to slander us. And this is after almost a year and a half of not hearing anything from these people, not in any major way. And he was just trying to basically say, well, these people they're failures. Their book, Common America, is a total disaster. Their campaign is awful. And he's ranting for about 35 minutes. And something happens where apparently he's ignoring the chat. And he starts reading the chat, and people are like, you need to keep quiet and you need to look at Kickstarter and see how they did. And he just fell flat on his face. Like, it was one of the most epic, like, egg in the face moments I've ever seen. And it all happened live on broadcast. And it occurred to me, I just said, we beat this guy and we didn't have to say anything. He basically looked at our work, judged it incorrectly, and then had to look at it objectively and come to terms with that. And you know, we encounter a lot of people who ask, how do you succeed? How do you make that step forward? And I think the only thing I have to say is it's a combination of two things. The one is easy and the other one is hard. The one is the work good? Is it objectively good? Did you put your whole into it? Is it the totality of your talent that is manifest in the work? That's the easy part, because all you have to do is manage yourself. The second part is luck. Can you get that to show itself to people? And that is the hardest part in terms of getting eyeballs on it. But I think that in a way there was a lot of schadenfreude to it, what happened, because it was basically a confirmation of what we had been planning for about a year and a half, just through our business method, which is, you know, if you're going to like it, you're going to like it because it's good. If you're not going to like it, that's fine. That's a subjective measure. But I don't think you can deny that. I think the best way forward is not through victimhood, not by saying, oh man, I'm being blacklisted. Oh man, send me super chats. I don't think that's an honorable way of doing anything.
No, and another thing about that too is that, yes, it is true that mainstream media does blacklist or gatekeep conservatives. I mean, there's no arguing that. You'll notice that, hey, didn't James Woods and Adam Carolla used to be regulars on Family Guy? Didn't they used to be like at least in one episode a season each? Now all of a sudden they haven't been in the show for like 5 years. Like, what happened to Kevin Sorbo? What happened to John Voight? You know, why is the media always going after Chris Pratt for no reason, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, it happens. The thing though is that, especially in like these bottom rungs of the media, and unfortunately that's what comics are. Comics aren't movies, comics aren't TV, comics aren't video games. Comics are pretty low on the totem pole in terms of consumable media. But even they have their gatekeepers and their blacklists. And yes, maybe you were conservative and you were blacklisted from working in the major studios, the major publishers. The thing is that Tim and I, our very first published book that came out in 2017, the very first thing that we put out was a Trump book. It was Thump the First 100 Days, and we got excoriated for it. That's where the whole Timothy Lim was a white nationalist thing came from, because Salon.com, the Mary Sue, and Vulture.com, and I think even Vox.com or BuzzFeed, one of them, did there's a whole slew of slander and hit piece articles on the book, on Tim, on me, and all that. And we weren't even I wouldn't even say we were kicked out of the industry, because we were never in it. We just had pretty much every mainstream door slammed on us from the outset. But we didn't stop. We did more books, and we kept making our books despite all the people telling us to stop. And we did our political satire stuff with Walmart, but we do our apolitical stuff too, like Black Hops and Common America. And it's a slow road to making a profit from your books. I mean, I remember our very first crowd fund, I think it might have been for Black Hops 2, because Black Hops Volume 1 was released direct market by Antarctic Press into comic shops. Black Hops 2, the initial release was on Indiegogo as a campaign, and I think that one made $15K, but that was back in 2018. We've done many more campaigns since then, and Common America 2, between Kickstarter and the last call pre-orders on Indiegogo, is closing in on 80K. You have to put in the work, and you have to create a quality product. You have to build customer respect and customer trust by delivering on all of your promises, getting your book out on time, making sure your book is good, actually caring about the quality of it, not just the content of your book, but how it's printed, how it's packaged, how it's shipped.
Yeah. And
you do that enough times, you're going to, within 3 years, then 4 years, maybe your first campaign will break even. But by the time you get to like your fifth, your sixth, 3 years later, you'll be doing a lot better, because you'll be building a genuine audience, a genuine customer base who trusts you and will come back for more and will tell their friends to come with them. Or you can do a flash in the pan thing. We're like, hey, everybody, I've been blacklisted. Please send me money. And then you'll get diminishing returns from that.
That's true. That's a spike. And then I've seen, like, it's a reverse V shape, I guess. You'll get a lot of attention and then just keep going down, down, down. And people are asking, wait, why am I going down in numbers? Why am I not more popular? It's like, wait, there was this one instance you can point to, and you can't do it again. It's not possible, because maybe you were done wrong. I'm not talking to a hypothetical person. But if I recall, you mentioned the Black Ops thing. No. Walmart. No, in 2017 was around the time when Antarctic was getting a lot of heat from the press, if I recall. Other creators I'm not going to bother mentioning right now, but I remember that there was a lot of blood in the water at the time from the media, comics media, saying, hey, look at these conservatives breaking out on their own. We shouldn't let them get published. So they went after Antarctic, I remember. And then there was an alternative path that suddenly opened up to a whole bunch of us, or I was watching at the time, I wasn't involved, of, hey, why don't we just go directly to our audience and say, do you want a book? And this is something I wanted to ask about. We mentioned sort of the long game, the marathon, not a sprint kind of thing, where comics, especially this past year, I hear Diamond went out of business, something like that. The landscape of comics has completely changed, and it's like all the middlemen are now gone, as far as I'm concerned. So it's indie creators making relationships and building reputations with an audience. Based on where you guys have been the past few years, where do you think comics is now? Where is it going? As far as creators earning livings and the audience, how do they find good creators to keep patronizing?
So Diamond did not go out of business, but they're close. They actually, I know that DC dropped them and went with Lunar Distribution. So they're kind of they're in a very bad place at the moment. It's up in the air simply because the only reason that they're still viable is that they're, now there's two methods of distribution, but for the longest time, Diamond had a monopoly. They still have the largest share as far as distribution of comics are concerned, but with the quality of the comics going down, the prices going up, I mean, this is all going to be left to be seen. So it's really a coin toss in terms of where this heads. I'm no savant, but I think where it's going to go is probably where you're thinking, George, which is I think in the most healthy environment, it would go the same route as comics and books in France and in Japan go, which is eventually you would have to weed out the no talent people in the industry. And by that, I mean the people who objectively, if you have a person with no talent and you put them on a book that people would typically buy regardless, let's say Spider-Man, people will buy it simply because it's Spider-Man. When you see that number going down, that means that that's the creative team. That's not the book. It is an indictment on the quality of the artist or even the writer that you have on it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think that with that weeding out is good because it means that the cream can rise to the top. And I think that that form of healthy competition is good. The kind of boutique market that, especially, I saw it definitely in France, because in France you have a mixture of the manga and the Western stuff. You have the French bande dessinée, which is like the graphic novels, and they're more in line of like what Doug TenNapel does, where they're very, very high quality. They're very prized. The artist can typically focus on maybe 2 to 4 books a year, and just put them out in huge quantities, and just call it a year. And then obviously you have the manga market in Japan, which is a little bit different because in those manga teams, you typically have a core creative team, but you have these background artists who don't get credited in it, but their speed of delivery is good and the quality is good. So I think that if the market in America wants to learn a lesson, barring any future calamities or pandemics, I think that what they have to do is they have to start learning some lessons from our foreign competitors.
I think that holds true. And my prediction is that, so currently, or the way it's kind of always been in comics, is that there's a 3-class system. There's the working class, the middle class, and then the corporate class. The corporate class, of course, is like Marvel and DC. The middle class, I would say, are the independent publishers who still release direct to market through local comic shops. And then the working class are the true, like the indie publishers. Right now, it's the ones who go online through campaign through Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and release direct to consumer. I think that in the very near future, that middle class of comic book publishers is going to go away. It's going to go extinct. I think, unfortunately, local comic shops, I mean, the writing's been on the wall for way too long. A lot of these independent publishers that have independent IPs, they just can't, they're not going to be able to survive on the current model. The corporate publishers, the big 2, Marvel and DC, they're never going to go anywhere. They're always going to exist, because they're backed up now by major corporations. Marvel's owned by Disney, DC's owned by Time Warner, and even some of the publishers like IDW. IDW has been clinging to existence because they've bought up licenses from a bunch of different corporations. They've got, Ninja Turtles from Viacom. They've got everything from Hasbro, like Transformers and G.I. Joe and My Little Pony. They got Godzilla from Toho. Maybe those will slip through their fingers and they'll lose them eventually, but they're kind of clinging to it. But they're clinging to it via corporate IPs. The big blow is going to be the middle class publishers. I think a lot of them, once the local comic shop method is gone, that direct retail method, is they might switch to what Tim was talking about, that European method of just putting out basically graphic novels that are released quarterly or 3 times a year, and maybe send those direct to market through Amazon and Barnes & Noble and online and major online retailers, as like trade paperbacks, the same way they would put those out. Mm-hmm. Or they'll go to the working class like us, and they'll just do campaigns to crowdfund their releases and put them out that way, and they'll still be able to keep some of their staff and talent and infrastructure. But I do think that there's going to be this rather large and unfortunate purge for the people stuck in the middle, the ones who aren't crowdfunding at the bottom, who have, like Tim and I, we call ourselves hobbyists and amateurs because this isn't our main source of income. We both have day jobs, and we do this on the side. We don't make much money from it. We just do it because we love it.
Mhm.
But a lot of the people who are in that middle class that I was talking about, that has been their source of income. You talked about making a living off of comics, and unfortunately, Tim and I don't really have an answer for that because neither of us make a living off of comics. And I think those people who don't have the corporate protections of working for the big two, and who aren't in the working class tier at the bottom, who have day jobs and just do this as a hobbyist thing on the side, they're the ones who are going to suffer the most, unless they have a fallback plan.
There was something you brought up, George, with regards to how right now it seems like there's no more middleman. I think there's a parallel that can be seen as far as what do they call it, like direct to video, like streaming services. So you had Netflix, I think is the big one that people think of, but then eventually you had these other people who just thought, hey, wait a minute, let's do the same thing. So you have HBO Max, you have Disney, you have Hulu. And so you'll hear people say, oh, this is great. Like it's the new dawn of the channel-less society where it's all direct to video. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, but that was only temporary, because now you might get rid of your cable package because you don't need like all these channels. But in a way, what's going to happen is you still end up where you started with a channel-like system, because you're still paying for the content that you want. It's just a lot more a la carte, so to speak. So I don't think that, in a way, like the whole channel smorgasbord, it didn't and it never will go away. It's just that the pool is probably going to be shortened and it's going to be more streamlined.
Part of the biggest problem I see going in the next few years, perhaps, is marketing related. I think the book quality is going to speak for itself. If people just make good books, the biggest challenge is having the audience be able to find those good books, because the internet is just this ocean. And then there's a couple of funnels here and there, a few communities where names are known. And that's, of course, how I met you guys online, at least. We haven't met in person yet, but someday. I want to see, I've been experimenting with this, and we all have actually, is by having YouTube channels, for instance, having online presences where people know our names and know our work. They can keep coming back to us as creators. Maybe the new form of shopping is not going to a store, but following your favorite creators and saying, oh, are they up to, what's their latest book? What's the, I don't know, past few books they've made? I might have missed some. I guess relationships with creators, relationships between creators and the audience is now, I suppose, the future of indie comics, as far as I can tell, which actually can go against, forgive me, it can go against sort of the, I don't know, for me, the typical artist is an introverted, I don't want to talk to anybody kind of person. But then again, that's what I am, so what do I know? It kind of goes against my nature. But I suppose having good relationships with creators and audiences, I guess I'm repeating myself, and creating good books is the magic formula.
Yeah, and I wish there was a way of doing it without the interaction, because not because I don't like talking to people, but because of creators who I know are naturally the stereotype of introversion, which is they don't have any social skills whatsoever. It's like, okay, so they have no way of basically marketing on their own. But in a way, it's almost unfair, because as much as we'd like the work to speak for itself, there has to be a venue or an avenue for the work to get out there. And that's where I think that there is going to be that inevitability of a third party that has to come in and kind of bolster them up or help them with that. It's not, I feel like it's a cheat to say, oh, well, they just need a YouTube channel with X number of subscribers attached to it. Well, how are you going to get those subscribers in? For example, Mark and I, we do this and we have a YouTube channel, but we can't even break, I don't know, like 700 subscribers, because we're not, our whole thing is not trying to be gregarious or amusing or anything like that. It is what it is.
Yeah, we don't, there are people who stream every day because their primary audience is on YouTube, and whether they have a topic or not, they got to stream every day, and you can hear them out there going like Krusty the Clown, like, another one of these. Right. You know, like we stream when we have an idea or something fun we want to talk about, and so that But obviously the way YouTube works is that if you don't stream every day, you don't show up in people's subscriptions every day. And if you're not in their subscriptions every day, they're going to forget about you amongst the 500 other subscriptions they have. You got to keep that content flowing. Like, well, we're not YouTubers. We have day jobs, and two, we make comics. The time that we spend on YouTube is time that we're not spending making comics or making a living. But when it comes to just the interactivity, the direct interactivity between consumer and creator, like that is a real double-edged sword, because what if your consumer just doesn't like you? And you might be a perfectly nice guy, and maybe they just don't like you. It's just you've expressed some opinions. They might not even be political opinions. Maybe you're just a fan of Star Trek, and this creator, you saw him make a post saying Star Trek sucks. Like, well, I'm never buying one of his books again. I fucking love Star Trek, or something like that. I've noticed that, and it's true for me as well. There are a lot of creators whose work I used to love until that barrier broke down, and I found out what they were actually like. I saw them on social media, and they're very disgusting, unpleasant, rude, vulgar, cruel people. And I just can't go back and enjoy their work anymore. And I've noticed a lot of them are the corporate old guard, the Marvel and DC folks. Maybe they don't work for Marvel and DC now, but they used to. But they always have that safety net of Marvel and DC, where they know that I can go out on social media and I can say these really awful things about people, and I'll always get a new job writing Spider-Man or Green Lantern or X-Men or something, or drawing Spider-Man or Green Lantern. And I'm safe, so I can just go out and do these really awful things on social media. Whereas I think more of the indie people who aren't ex-pros, who aren't coming from corporate comics, who don't have that safety net, they tend to be a much more pleasant experience on social media. They find out that you catch more flies with sugar, that kind of thing. That you don't necessarily have to hide your opinions. I mean, you can't walk on eggshells forever. But you also don't go out on Twitter and tell everybody to F off back to Christland if you don't like atheism or whatever. People know who I'm talking about with that kind of stuff. They kind of figure that out. And that's where the double-edged sword comes from, is that I think a lot of these really awful people, the ones who have the safety net, they're the ones driving some readership and consumers away from their books, whereas the people who give better customer service, better customer interaction, or are just generally nicer people to have on your social media feed, well, you're going to be more inclined to give them your money for their product than for the person who's a jerk and making jokes at your expense.
I think in the long run, though, well, I'm trying to be optimistic, I suppose, but for instance, you guys are putting out an insane amount of books, and you're saying you're doing it part-time per year. How many books did you do this year? 4, 5, 6? A ton, right?
Yeah, we did Common 1, Common 2, Black Ops 3, and Walmart. Those 4.
Yeah. So we published 4, but Tim has drawn 5 by the end of the year.
Yeah.
And the 5th is going to come out next year. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know how Tim does it. I can write 5 books a year and do my day job. I don't know how the heck Tim drew 5 books this year.
Yeah, there's no whatchamacallit. We don't have any kids. I think that's a big thing right now. And I say that, but then you got guys like Matt Weldon, who has the same level of productivity that I have, but he has a wife and now 4 kids.
Jeez.
Oh man.
Man, there's like a million questions to ask based off that. But I guess to focus specifically on the work itself, how many days left are in the Indiegogo for Common America Volume 2?
At
7.
At the time of this recording, 7.
Right. It's November 25th for anyone who's late to the party. But I especially wanted to have you guys on because of the deadline approaching. Could you tell us some... Well, how do I put this? I've cheated. I've already read it. But please tell us about the story, some themes, and then I want to get into the motivations behind some of those themes.
Sure.
Yeah.
In a nutshell, it's the story of basically the girl next door, Carly Vanders, who just wants to be a fashionista. She wants to be a fashion designer. And then something happens while she's on a USO tour. She gets bombarded by cosmic, something of a cosmic nature, and she gets abilities as a super heroine. And just by coincidence, these strange monsters start popping up, and her agent basically teams up with her and creates this persona of Warhen originally. And some of the themes that we cover in that first book aren't so much the villains that she fights, but some of the moral conflicts that happens when suddenly you're put in the spotlight and everyone wants a piece of you. And that's not necessarily everyone is gunning for you, but people want to steer you in directions that might not be living up to your principles. And so she has to come to terms with a lot of those quandaries. And when we originally launched the book, it was kind of billed as like a Super Sentai type thing, but that was almost a red herring, because what we were really focusing on were some of the lessons that we learned over the last, I guess, 2 to 4 years working in comics, and some of the moral quandaries that we ran into.
Mm-hmm. Part of, specifically in Volume 1, I noticed there's this recurring theme of choosing what to do with yourself, being versus being told what to do with yourself.
Yes, absolutely. And originally, when we conceived of the character, it was pretty much going to be a straight up Sentai homage. And those elements are still present, but a lot of it has been more story-wise, a lot of it has been more based on our personal experience. We've dealt with a lot of comic pros who definitely, I always make the joke that a lot of them, they don't need a Hollywood committee. They have Hollywood committees in their brains. When you talk to them about the decisions that they made or their plans moving forward, everything is geared towards getting that Netflix deal. Everything is geared towards, hey, you need
merchandising.
Yeah, merchandising.
Where the real money is made.
Flamethrower.
Yeah.
And it was that. And there were a lot of times where Mark and I, we would have some of these meetings with some of these people, and we'd walk away and I'd be like, were you shaking your head inwardly at some of the stuff said? And he would say, yeah, I can't believe that that's the way that they think, because that's not how an artist thinks. An artist puts the work first, and then you think about all the other stuff later. You don't put the cart before the horse. And so a lot of the frustrations and a lot of the observations that we had to deal with in the last 2 years, it manifested itself in a story. And there's, by and large, I think we were very happy because it was a sleeper hit. I mean, like pretty much overnight, people loved it. But we noticed that a lot of our detractors were saying, hey, this character reminds me of this person. And it's not obvious unless you know that the person that you perhaps envy is guilty of the thing that we point out. So again, it's like a Rorschach test where you see in it what you want to see, and we don't confirm or deny any of it. But it's like, no, if we experience something that we thought was wrong and immoral, unethical, and unprincipled, and we happen to put that into a character, a fictional character in the book, and then you read it and you happen to see this other person and say, hey, that's an attack on this person that I sycophantically love. Well, that's on you, because you're seeing a villain where honestly it's meant to represent just a general immorality. It's not meant to represent anyone in particular.
Mm-hmm.
With Carly's journey, especially in these first 2 volumes, I think the big one that I hope at least rings true, and we've heard feedback already on Common America 2, and people saying that it really hit the chord with them, is Carly's a character who is just attacked by everyone in the media for no reason. And the media is different from monsters. She can fight the monsters. You can't hit back when someone on TV is slandering you, someone on the internet is slandering you, someone on YouTube is slandering you, and all these articles go up and libel you. And you know you didn't do anything wrong. It's just that someone out there doesn't like you and has it in for you. Mm-hmm. And how discouraging that can be, how much it can just beat you down and wear you down little bit, day by day. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that specific situation. I think about the kid in middle school who has to go to school every single day knowing that a whole bunch of kids are going to pick on them and treat them like garbage and call them names and basically just take the joy of out of life and make everything really hard for them. And they still have to go to school the next morning every single day. Or the person who goes to their retail job or their job behind a counter, essentially, their counter service job, knowing that there's going to be these really awful customers who come in and say awful things to you, knowing that you can't say anything back to them or you'll get fired. And they still go and do it every day. And that can be one of the hardest things in the world to do. And that's something that we want to capture with Carly and her experience, is that she's persevering and she's not doing it without showing any ill effects, without there being any scars or any impact on her, but she's doing it anyway. And I think that's the kind of lesson that we really want to encourage in people, and it's one that's very universal and can transcend different ages or demographics, is that there's going to be times when it just seems like everyone's against you, everyone's coming down on you, you're not getting any support, but maybe you're just not looking in the right directions, or you're not remembering the people who are out there for you. And that's kind of what we want to, at least with Carly's story arc so far, that's something we want to hit upon.
That's, for instance, there's a scene, I don't think this is necessarily a spoiler, but with the scarf, where she gives the scarf to somebody. Would you consider that a spoiler? I don't want to take that liberty.
No, we don't consider that a spoiler.
Okay. I was moved by that analogy in the story where she gives a scarf to a homeless lady, and it turns out to be more meaningful to her, the character, than punching a million monsters and saving the city, because that's who she is, and she wants to make people happy. Let's say she likes making clothes, this character, and that's where her heart is, that's where her passion is. And I think, Mark, to what you were saying, the things that are the most meaningful to us, I guess we have this internal way of our brains reward us for what's the most meaningful versus this is what other people say is going to be meaningful. Like, for example, if your campaign didn't make quote unquote enough money by the standards of some others, it's like, yeah, but you're gauging success as a monetary number versus how much do people enjoy the story? How much did my vision get across? In that sense, it was a great success to me. And they're measuring it with a different ruler than we are.
And it's also, I mean, we've seen those goalposts move over and over again. When we did our first campaign and it made 15K, the usual suspects came out of the woodwork, and they didn't just, call us a failure. They said, like, you should stop. If you're not making at least 20K, you're wasting your time. You're wasting other people's time. You need to stop. You have to stop. And then we did our next campaign and we made over 20K. And then they came out again and said, oh, you're not making at least 50K. It was the same thing over again. You need to stop. You're wasting your time. You're wasting everybody else's time, et cetera. That usual rigmarole. And then Common America 2 came out, and we're at about 80K now. And again, we have people coming out and calling us failures. No matter how much we improve, how much we get better, these people are never going to be satisfied. They don't exist to be taught a lesson. They're not going to learn the error of their ways because they don't actually have conviction. They only come out for the internet blood sport. They only come out to tear you down. And you have to remember that when that happens, when just all these people seem like they come out of nowhere, people you've never heard of, never spoken to, and they seem to only exist to whittle away at you. That's when it can be really hard to keep your chin up and persevere. But if you're doing your work and you're very proud of it, and and other people are telling you that they enjoy your work, then that's the feedback you need to listen to. That's what you need to take to heart, not the anonymous jerks on social media or YouTube who seem to only ever open their mouths when they want to tear you down.
It's in RPG terms. I talk about video games a lot. Forgive me if anyone doesn't get it. Like I call this debuffing, where it's I'm going to, I don't know. Let's say you can run 100 meters in 10 seconds. I'm going to try to hurt your feelings so that you run that 100 meters in 15 seconds. I want to slow you down. I want to break you. I want to get rid of the competition so that I'm the only fish in the pond. It doesn't matter if the pond is shrinking. I want to be the biggest fish in it. Whereas I think a real good network of creators, a healthy network, is let's make the pool even bigger so that we can all grow and be massive successes in our own ways. But again, Common America does touch on these themes. But just to reiterate for anyone listening, it's not this, we're making it sound like it has great lessons and all that stuff. It's also really, really fun to read. I just want to assure everybody of this. I'm going to have links, of course, to the campaign and stuff in the description so you can see the pages for yourself. But the book itself, there's a million great jokes. It's charming. It's fun. I have some quotes written down here that I just loved of, for instance, quote, "You want to be Major League, you have to put on a swimsuit and punch a dinosaur." Or you even snuck in, "You have to prove the justice of our culture." I loved that. That's so retro for me.
It took forever for anybody to actually get that one. I think it took like a year and a half.
The second I saw it, I'm like, oh my gosh, Ghostbusters. And then there's jokes like Top Kekistan, which I just love that stuff. But like, okay, so there's a million Easter eggs if anyone doesn't know already. But also, I want to ask you, we've almost come to an hour. I don't want to waste too much of your time, but I want to ask you guys about your creative process now that you're both here. How do you guys go from blank page, from idea to blank page to finished page? What's the process like?
So what typically happens is that I'll typically start it off by just giving Mark my thought. Like, for example, we're doing Common America, Black Ops, the crossover. That's the next thing I have to work on. So it's like, okay, so here's my idea, Mark. Here's the MacGuffin. Here are the characters involved. I know it begins this way, and I know it ends this way, but I have no idea what happens in the middle. And so he and I will ping pong back and forth and brainstorm and say, here's how I think it should happen in the 3-act way. Mark then will sit down, and before he gets me a script, he'll give me typically a 2 to 3 page summary of the Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 structure based on the pages. So for example, pages 1 through 2, prologue, we're going to see this origin scene of this character. Pages 3 to 5, it's a transition scene as they go from this location to another to set up for the mission. So nothing is written down in terms of dialogue. It's just an overview of where things are going in the plot. And then I'll give some feedback and some notes. And then afterwards, he'll script the whole thing and actually break it down in terms of the dialogue that's taking place. Mm-hmm. So from the time we actually brainstorm to the time that script is done, it's typically a month and a half, maybe 2 months. And then I do about a page a day, except for Sundays. I typically don't work on Sundays. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking at like a 64-page book, we can typically knock it out within 2 months. And you include the script, and that's 3 altogether.
Yeah, I actually have a series of videos on the Bunderdome. If anybody wants to go look those up, they're called Comic Script Tips Unscripted. And the first one I talk about is pre-scripting, and the second one I talk about script formatting, and then I talk about fundamentals and the installments from there. But the pre-scripting is I'd say, at least from my end of things, it's the most difficult part of writing it, because first I get with Tim, and then we develop the summary, and then I develop the page breakdowns, is what I call them, where it's like page 1, this happens, page 2, this happens. And it's during the page breakdown drafts, that's where the majority of the actual plotting and story molding happens. Like I just sent to Tim today the page breakdowns for Black Ops X Common America. And he's going to get me back his notes, and I'm going to do a second draft of those. But that's where all the details of the stories and the character arcs and the development and all the plot specific stuff happens. The action breakdowns, how many pages, if there's an action sequence of person versus person, how many pages that action sequence is going to be. And Tim will tell me, like, well, I think you need to take a couple pages away from this one so you can add it to this section down here, because I think that's because he's the visual storyteller. He's like, just visually, I can tell you that what you put down here as taking up 2 pages is going to need 4 pages, and what you put over here as 4 pages really only needs 2. Mm-hmm. And then I can shuffle that stuff around. But once I have that page breakdown where I know what's going to be on page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, writing the script after that is a breeze, because that's just taking all that and exaggerating it and embellishing it. And the way I write is I do panel breakdowns. So I'll do like, page 6, panel 1, description, dialogue, such and such says this. Panel 2, description, dialogue. And panel 3, description, dialogue. And then I move on to page 7 and do the same thing. And just extrapolating from what I wrote in the page breakdowns. So now that I've finished the page breakdowns, at least the first draft of it on Black Ops X Common America, once I do the second draft on that and Tim and I agree on all the plot and everything, writing the script is going to be a breeze.
And Tim, you received the script after going back and forth with Mark. Do you embellish? Do you do thumbnails based off that, or are you already working on the thumbnails?
I don't really work on thumbnails.
Oh, I remember. I'm sorry. Yeah, you mentioned this on the last time we talked. You just go straight into your pencils.
Yeah, and I do that to save time because I've listened to countless videos that you've done talking about that. There's a trade-off between the amount of detail you put in versus what is needed to convey the story. And I call it a magic trick because that's essentially what it is you're trying to fool the audience into seamlessly seeing a story play out in front of their eyes. And you can obviously blur things in the background or not put as much detail as long as things are flowing the way they need to. So that's one thing that I do to skip that process, is the thumbnailing. And what we do is, because I'm also the letterer, I kind of act as an editor too. So if there's something in the script that I see that Mark put in that I didn't catch the first time around, that is maybe like a plot hole or something that needs to be filled in, I'll fill it in. And Mark will typically catch it and he'll either approve or disapprove. So he has final veto in terms of any of those little story changes I might make as far as like the dialogue is concerned. So it's very synergistic from beginning to end.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it is edit on the fly. And we do, in a way, it's kind of a perversion of the Marvel method, in that if we run into a problem, I trust Mark's writing ability to write around it. It reminds me of that quote from Thank You for Smoking. It's like they're filming this movie in space, but their sponsor is like a cigarette company. And so they're like, oh, wait, we're running into a problem. It's like, what's that? Well, our scientific advisors tell us that we can't smoke in space. How are we going to get around it? And Aaron Eckhart tells the guy, it's like, you're the script writer. You know how this works. Just say, hey, isn't it good in 2030 that we invented that thing that lets people smoke in space? And I thought about that and I said, that's brilliant, because it happens all the time. Like, you think about Ghostbusters and it's like, hey, does it bother you that you're wearing an unlicensed nuclear accelerator on your back? And like, no one questions that. Like, the audience just takes it because the script just puts this bait. It's like an auditory sleight of hand where the script writer just wrote it in a way where it like basically coerces you into a hallucination where you're just like, oh yeah, these are like ghost pest exterminators who have like the scientific ability to make nuclear accelerators that can catch ghosts. No one ever questions the science. So there's been some times where Mark is like, well, what about this plot hole? And it's like, you know what to do. Just write around it and people won't notice. At least the people who, as far as Common America is concerned, it's more lighthearted. So it's like, no one's going to care if we can't explain this particular thing. That's not the point. You know, most people understand that we're teetering that line between legitimate, like serious storytelling and satire, essentially.
Yeah, with especially between like the script and Tim's art, we had a stream on the Bunderdome like a couple weeks ago with Roland Mann. He's the editor for Malibu Comics. He's also a script writer. He's been active since like the 80s. He's got decades of experience. And I was talking with him about scripting, and we kind of went at it for a second because both of us have very different approaches to scripting. He scripts a bit more in the Marvel method style, but not as bad as the Marvel method style. He gives much more description, but the Marvel method is where you say page 1, a summary of page 1, and then that's all you give to the artist. And the artist decides how many panels, what specifically goes into those panels, whether a character should be talking or not in those panels, what their emotive response should be. And then they give that art back to Roland, and then Roland captions in the dialogue and the narration over the artwork. Mm-hmm. And the way I do things, and this is actually at Tim's request, because Tim told me that this is how he likes to draw with the script, is I do the panel breakdowns. I write, like, this is what happens in panel 1, this is what happens in panel 2. I write the dialogue because the dialogue guides the emotional reaction that the characters have. And then, I'll give that script to Tim, but as the visual storyteller, Tim will look at it and he can decide, because he's better at this, like, well, Mark says he wants this to happen in 5 panels, but it can't happen in 5 panels visually, so I'm going to make it 6. So Mark says has this down at 6 panels, but I can actually make it more efficient and have it be 4 panels or things like that. or sometimes I'll just put down like sometimes as a choreographer, I'm not a visual storyteller. I'm writing prose. So there are visual cues that I'll totally miss. And in Common America 2, Tim put a great Band-Aid over one of the visual cues I missed. That was hilarious. And I don't think it's a spoiler for anybody, really. It's during one of the fights, I think it was the first one, or the second one, the second monster fight, Carly is flying through the air and she's carrying Misha with her. And in the script, I had it went from that to Carly on the ground talking to Kimiko, because Kimiko had just gotten stepped on, and asking if Kimiko's okay. I didn't give an instruction on what happened to Misha. So Tim just drew this really funny drawing in the background of Misha just falling and going, yeah, because Carly dropped her. And like that was a really great Band-Aid over something I had missed in the script that added like a really great joke to it. And it made me like, just made me laugh out loud when I saw it because I wasn't expecting it.
Wow. Yeah, there's when writing and drawing comics, especially, there's a lot of drafts that have to happen. The first draft is usually the worst, of course. Then second, you slowly start refining it until it comes to its quote-unquote final draft. But even then, there's still things that we would want to change. But the way that you guys are describing it, actually, as you were describing it, and I was thinking about Common 1 and 2, but specifically 2, there's that magic mud. I was thinking about a lump of clay in the sense of storytelling, I suppose. At the very beginning, the clay is wet and moldable, and you keep passing it back and forth between, say, writer and artist, maybe an editor, and you keep, shaping it. But then eventually, when it comes time, I guess you want to be reworking it the most when it's still wet. But when it comes time to do pencils, inks, especially colors, things are kind of set in stone, and you can only chisel at that point. You can't really move things around so easily. But it's cool that you guys are working together well. Even though there's a lot of back and forth, you're able to synergize properly, where you're not making giant cuts to the story, it sounds like.
That would be awful. So I think that's that's one of the reasons why I think we're able to work so efficiently, is that when it comes to like the big important plot details and character arcs, we get all of that settled and out of the way before I even do draft 1 of the script. We get all of that out of the way during the page breakdowns and the summary process. Like I think it was yesterday, or it might have been Monday, when I was working on the page breakdowns, I was having trouble with what to do with one of the characters, whether they should even be in this crossover book. And so I called Tim up and we talked back and forth, and we discussed it and figured out a compromise for this character. And I did that while I was doing the page breakdowns. Imagine if I had written a full first draft script with this character, and then we decided afterwards, cut this character out, or no, add this character in because you didn't put them in. Mm-hmm. Like the massive rewrite that would cause for an entire second draft. That would be a nightmare, and that would add like weeks to our production schedule. Mm-hmm. But if we knock all of that out of the way when it's really just in the summary process, the second draft for our comic scripts is very minimal. Like when I send him the first draft, he sends me back his notes. But usually the changes that I need to make on them, I can get back to him in a day or two, and then basically after the second draft, he's pretty much satisfied and ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the magic word there, based on, I don't work well with other people, for anyone listening, if I've mentioned this before. I'm a super, super proud person. So when you guys describe going back and forth like that, it takes a lot of humility to be able to, and comfort with your partner, to be able to say like, hey, what do you think of this? Am I totally wrong? Should I not write an entire draft and insist that this is what we do? It's good that you're able to...
Well, I mean, that also just the fact that we're doing it so early when it's still kind of a malformed idea, and I haven't put in the blood and sweat and the hours of writing it all out in a script and being like, why didn't you tell me that a month ago when I started this? Yeah. When it's something that's just a sentence and I have to go back and switch it, then I'm obviously much more receptive to that idea than after, I've written, 12 pages of panel breakdowns and dialogue. Yeah. But it's also that Tim and I have known each other for, over a decade. So we don't take things personally. We're friends.
That's good. Yeah.
And what you're bringing up, George, is, believe it or not, I think Mark and I are the same way. We don't really work well with others. And I don't mean that in an antagonistic way. What I mean by that is that he and I have a synergy that's unique. For example, I don't think he minds me saying this because it's been public, but the last person who I worked with who was not Mark was Doug Ernst. And Doug Ernst, his book Soul Fighter, that's his. Like, that is his from top to bottom. Mark and I had input in it. We had some suggestions, but the advice I gave him, because I think he's like a perfectionist, he was like, well, is it good? Is it good? Like, if you need to make changes, make changes. But then what I told him was, if I keep on making changes based on what I think needs to happen, then it will no longer be yours. It will be partly mine. And in the future, I don't ever want there to be any question as to the work that came from you versus anything that came from me. I feel like you need the lion's share of what had transpired here so that you can own it in its totality and not have any regrets about that. Whereas everything that Mark and I do, it is from its moment conceived between two creators. So it's two of us agreeing on a set of characters from beginning to end. We're both working on them back and forth as time goes on. Whereas in the case of some of the creators that we've worked with, we're kind of brought in either in the middle or at the end of the process to have our input. And it's like, hey, as editors, there's not much that we can do without stepping on your toes. So I think that that's the key difference. If I didn't have Mark as a writer, I would probably just be completely independent and be like, I don't really work well with other writers. I'll probably just end up doing it on its own. It'll probably suck, but at least I'll feel confident in knowing that at least the vision that I think that we want for it is intact.
On that note, actually, I don't want to keep you guys too much longer, but all right. So the campaign's going to be wrapping up in the next week or so. What are your plans? I assume you've got a ton of books almost ready to go. You're going to ship those. What happens next? What are the future plans for the series and for your partnership? What are you guys going to be doing in 2021?
So the books are already here. They're going to ship pretty much the moment we get our funding, which is so far they've been pretty fast. 4 to 7 days is when Indiegogo sends us our funds, and then they're right out the door. We can typically send 1,000 books out within 48 to 72 hours. So this might be one of the quickest fulfillments that we do. I am 16 pages away from finishing Common America 3. So I'll have that ready to go by December. And then we won't launch that campaign until January the 20th. I'll have the pre-campaign page up and running, I'm hoping, within the week. So maybe by next Wednesday, I should have the pre-launch page open. But our slate for next year is Common America 3, Black Ops 4, which is actually a team-up book. So it's actually Black Ops X Common America. And so for people who wonder what the X is, it's basically like from fighting games like
Cross
Capcom
Tekken.
X. Yeah, like Capcom X Namco. I've gotten some questions about that. They're like, is this a spelling error? Why does it say X?
Oh, I get it. I love it.
Yeah, I knew you would, George. Yeah, and it's like, no, it's like a naming convention because it's like, it's not versus. They're not fighting each other, but it's a crossover. So we use X.
Yeah.
And then Common America 4 is going to end the year. So we're going to do 3 books next year, 64 pages, 72 pages, 64 pages. So between those 3, you're looking at still over 200 pages of content in 2021.
And that's part-time.
And it's part-time.
I want to remind everyone listening, this is his part-time job.
Yeah, and it's in a way we're trying to prove a point. You'll hear the narrative. I just think it's objectively wrong. It's like, 1, you got overpriced your comics. 2, it's hard. Like, comics is hard. Don't expect a book to come out of this caliber except once every 2 years. Wrong. It's just wrong. I mean, I'm sorry, but time management and being able to sit down and do it and not pussyfoot around, like that's really what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, part of what I want this, I mean, it's not a huge series or anything, but for anyone listening who might be new to the channel, like, I really want to remind everyone or let everyone know, like, I want to push, this is examples of professionalism that, granted, we're not working with publishers anymore. We're independent, fully independent, but like, this is what professionalism is. Like, passion, a little bit of sacrifice in the sense of maybe we give up our social lives or our hobbies. But we're making something that we're so passionate about. We just want to give up all our free time to make these things. And I especially love your guys' example of how many books you put out in such high quality, and you have great attitudes, and I admire that so much. So for anyone listening, I'm going to be putting links to your guys' channel down in the description and, of course, the campaigns. I really want you guys to explore these two creators especially. And just keep in mind, this is what professionalism looks like. And we have a mutual admiration for Doug TenNapel, of course, who I've also had on the channel. And when we talk about professionalism, I love these examples that I look to you guys and say, okay, how fast are they going? What's their pace? I have to try to at least try to keep up. Even if I can't, I try to. So I love your guys' example that you're setting.
Well, the feeling is mutual. There's a key moment in Common America 1 where it was actually at the very end after the book was completed. I said, Mark, there's one thing missing. Her name is Common America, but we don't give a very satisfying explanation as to why there's a patriotic element to her. So Mark came up with the line in the book where she gives a monologue. It's probably the only serious moment in the book where she says that what defines an American, and the word is self-reliance and independence. The idea that she's not being bolstered by a corporation. She does not have huge influencers who are going to have her back, but that's okay, because the spirit of America has always been like doing things by pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. And so it's interesting to see how things have changed just within this last year alone. You're over on your side printing books at home, doing this home method, and if nothing else, as you grow in popularity and you find that maybe, well, heck, little old George, like I can't just print all these books on my own if I'm having to print like 20,000 of them. No. You will be in a much better position, because when you look at maybe other people who can help you, you know the standard because you set the standard. You know exactly the speed it takes, how much it costs, and all of that. So you're in a much better place as far as like not only your negotiation, but also in your future business practices. And I think that's healthy. That's the way to go, and I love it. I think that's the fighting spirit that patriots have.
Mark, can I invite you to add to that as well? A little parting gift of inspiration.
No, I think
no,
man,
I agree.
You're great. The fact that you've been doing so much from home, but it's those comics, those Twitter comics, and I see those everywhere. You're getting the kind of exposure that dwarfs what Tim and I are doing. Like you I think because the memeability of your work is through the roof, that you're probably getting more exposure than even Doug TenNapel. And Doug TenNapel is the guy that Tim and I look up to, as our like, we want to do something someday that's as good as his Earthworm Jim and Bigfoot Bill campaigns someday,
I do have to ask you to forgive me. I didn't mean like, please say something nice about me. I'm so embarrassed. I wanted to make sure everyone
I know
heard.
That's not what you meant. I just want.
I wanted everyone to hear your voice. But no, I think as a closing thing to mention for everyone, like there is a small group, even though we're not necessarily, I don't think any of us have made oaths to each other yet, but like I really am optimistic that there's a small group of guys and gals who are creators, indie creators, who know each other and respect each other. And I think in the next year or two, maybe they're just by knowing each other's names and mentioning each other's names every once in a while, doing shows like this, some kind of cross-pollination might happen where just organically a little, I don't like the word community necessarily, but something might happen. I don't know what this slurry is going to turn into, but I want to find a way to pay it forward, I guess. Like by accident, I gained a bunch of followers, whatever that means. But that's not, I don't want to be Atlas holding the globe on my back necessarily. I would love for somehow to convert all this attention, not just on me, but on other indie creators. I really have a huge passion for the comics industry, especially indie comics. I want to find a way to make a healthy sort of little network of creators and fans who can all find each other. And hey, here's these great creators, here's these great books. Let's all find each other and not let the good stuff fall between the cracks. I think that's my big, I see that as a huge injustice. I don't want good books to fall between the cracks. But yeah, I guess that's my little soapbox.
No, absolutely. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, like, when there's a will, there's a way. And it's not just with comics. We're making comics because that's what we grew up with and that's what we love. I mean, you, me, Doug, all of us. And just because we can't get in the door at a major publisher for whatever reason, when there's a will, there's a way, and that's crowdfunding, and that's getting our work out there. If you're a prose author and you can't get through the door at a major publisher, you can still self-publish through Amazon. If you want to make a video game, and the major video game publishers don't want to do like an 8-bit 2D side-scrolling beat 'em up, there's always Steam, and that's where like all these great 2D games that the major publishers don't make anymore, like Super Meat Boy and Shovel Knight, which are huge now because there's still a market for them. So, I mean, as long as you're making what you love and you're putting that passion and the skill that you've accrued over all of your experience into that work, you're going to get it out there and people are going to find it. And the people who find it are likely going to enjoy it.
That's a great way to end it. Yeah, I agree. I guess I'll just thank you both for coming again. I'm going to leave your links to Twitter down below. Everybody listening, I urge you to check them out, follow them. I guess I'll just say thanks for your guys' time. Is there anything else you want to say before we go?
We just want to thank you. It's been fun. It's been watching your star grow and shine. It's been fantastic. And I know that off the air we'll talk about it, but we definitely are going to have you on the channel, at least you and me for sure, to talk about politics. Sure. That's something that a lot of people in comics don't want to talk about. But then again, I think we're in a position to do it. It was kind of embarrassing because for the longest time, it's just Mark and I doing this. And it's like, okay, well, it'll just be the two of us. But now that we know that we have you who are doing it, now we have a third perspective. So I can't wait for us to have that chat, which will probably within the next week.
All right. So all of you listening, please keep an eye out for that. I'll tweet about it, I'm sure. All right. Well, I'll stop recording here. Thanks again for coming. Thanks to everyone for listening. And I urge you guys to look through the archive because I have another episode with just him where we talk more about our artistic processes. So check that out too. And please look for Common America Volume 2, which I'll also link down below. There's only a week left, so go check it out.
And happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yes.